Okay, let's get this going. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Key Cybersecurity Requirements for NIS2, Certificate Management and PKI Deep Dive. This is actually part 2 in a session of, or in a sort of session of 2, where we have done part 1 earlier in September. So you should be able to find that in your Bright Talk channel. My name is Malin Rydelius, and I'm VP Community at Keyfactor, and I'm your host for today's session. Admir, so then I would also like to introduce sort of our speakers, of course, today. You recognize Admir from the first session. It's Admir Abdurrahmanovic. He's Senior Vice President of Strategy here at Keyfactor. I also have Pierre Cordy. He's Director of Sales for Southern Europe. And as I've just said, sort of we're actually all of us from Keyfactor. This session is being recorded, and you will automatically receive an on-demand access once we wrap up for today. Admir and Pierre are also here to answer your questions, so please submit questions throughout the session and also during the Q&A in the Q&A box in the Bright Talk application. And we will actually take as many as we can at the end. And we will also, if we cannot get to all of them, all the questions, we will come back to them offline after the session. What is important also is that you give this session a rating. So at the end, Bright Talk will give you that option. And your feedback is really important for us to improve for future sessions. With all that covered, I will pass you across to Admir and Pierre, who will take you through today's webinar. And I will also let them introduce themselves. So the floor is yours, Admir and Pierre.
Thank you, Malin. So my name is Admir Abdurrahmanovic. I serve as a Senior Vice President of Strategy. In my role, I follow up all kind of interesting legislation, standards, etc. So one of the important things that we cover at Keyfactor is also NIS2 Directive. I covered some of the topics in the previous session. We'll go through the agenda, but I will pass the word to Pierre.
Yes, thank you, Admir. So, as a Director of Sales for France and Southern Europe, and I'm based in Paris in the campus Cyber in La Défense in Paris, I have the privilege to be involved in helping customers into very concrete deployment. So I will be able to cover some real-life examples of deployment which are helping the NIS2 objective.
Yeah. Thank you, Pierre. So, to recap a little bit over the agenda that we would like to cover today, there are things that we will repeat from the previous session, but we will not go into details. As Malin pointed out, there is session number 1 if you would like to go into some other aspects that have already been covered. As Pierre pointed out, for this session, we would like to have even more interaction and answer some of your questions. We actually do have 2 outstanding questions from the previous session that, due to the shortness of time, we did not address, but we will in this session. Here, I will already start on the next slide. When it comes to the NIS2 Directive, it is important to understand it from the intent of the legislator. Here we have one of the recitals, quite many of them, and this one in particular, as we mentioned even in the previous session, outlines what is the intent of the legislator. The intent of the legislator is to bring most of the organizations up in a higher level of cybersecurity awareness, resilience, and capability to deliver their products or services to our society in a way that they are not being disrupted, or that disruptions are as minimal or as few as possible. The legislator is indicating here certain cryptographic principles or security principles, more generically said, that they would like us to bring into our products and services, or that should permeate our organizations. What is here shown in green is just that I highlighted some of these things that any of you who are in the cybersecurity area would recognize as a terminology or the things that we are meeting on a daily basis. Going even a little bit more into what is the intent of the legislator, is that they want us to bring this cybersecurity risk management measures. And the reason for cybersecurity risk management measures, they want us to assess where we are in almost, I wouldn't say daily, but relatively very often, to assess where we are in terms of our capability to prevent outages, to assure that our services and products are being delivered in such a manner that we do not disrupt even other actors in our society. In order to do all of that, there are a bunch of things that the NIS2 Directive tells what the national authorities or competent authorities will do and how they will control and monitor what is going on there. However, for our topic here today, what we are looking is for the organizations that are affected, that are part of this, what we are calling a critical or important entities, and what they need to assure that that they implement within their organizations. Just as an interesting sideline, there is a bunch of interesting research from ENISA that kind of supports NIS2 and related type of legislations. And one of the research indicates what would be the needs for the budgets that organizations need to, so to say, upgrade or prepare themselves for compliance with the NIS2 directive. And the estimations are, if an organization was already under NIS1, then the ICT budget would probably increase about 10% over the next 3 years. And if it's to the NIS2, then the ICT budget may need to increase by 20% in order to bring the level of to the satisfactory level of the compliance. That, of course, does not necessarily mean that particularly your organization will need to increase 20. Some will only need 5, but some will need 50, depending on what is the previous state of the organization. If we look furthermore, a little bit more specific into what are we asked to implement, here I will go again through some of the measures that that the legislature want us to implement, and what we need to think of in this list is that the legislator is really trying hard not to say how, but what needs to be done. And we are now trying to interpret for you and help you guideline yourselves towards what could be the appropriate house in order that your organization comes to the level of satisfactory compliance with the NIS2. So the measures that we have seen in the paragraph 1 that are described here is in the article 21.2, a little bit more specific here in terms of security, IT security measures that we want to implement. We have split it into 2 slides because this is a pretty long list, and I'd like just to kind of generically address some of these. When it comes to the policies and risk analysis, I would say that the intent there is to assure that we have a capability to assess what are the risks that our organization is facing. Different organizations will have different sets of risks depending if they are very prominent publicly or if they are very critical for some society's service. However, most organizations today are, in a way, if I put totally my hat of IT security professional, most organizations today are IT organizations, and then they are maybe manufacturer, or then maybe they are, I don't know, into telecom or whatnot. But without the policies and capability to address the risks, the situation will be such that we will be immediately incompliant. It's that strong emphasis in the NIS2 directive. When it comes to the incident handling, the what we need to assure is that, of course, we minimize as much as possible occurrence on any type of incident that negatively affects our organization or downstream any other organization or society in general. But when we do have an incident, there has to be a proper set of measures how the incident is being handled. In connection to the incident handling, there is also a whole area about incident reporting. The incident reporting is much stronger in NIS2 compared to NIS1, both in the terms of the time that we are mandated to report to our competent bodies in the member state, basically within a very short period of time, 24 hours now instead of 72, we need to report that we have had incident. And then there are two more, so to say, time-wise gateways, 72 hours and 30 days, and where we need to provide a full report on what has happened. Just to put this in perspective, so I'm addressing you now from London. I'm attending Gartner Security Risk Management Conference, very interesting. There was really brilliant talk about incidents that organizations are facing. So typically, it takes several months before an incident is being reported. The intent of the legislator here is not to publicize or shame anybody when they are reporting the incident that has happened. The intent of the legislator for NIS2 here is that we report to our national bodies, and then they will share internally between the other member state competent bodies, as it's called, information about incident. Why they are going to do that? Because some of the incidents may be of such nature that they affect many, or some of these incidents might be caused by certain security flaws, malfunctions, backdoors, whatnot, situations that can be maybe used by adversaries in other situations. So the intent with reporting is not to shame anybody. There is an aspect where we should address a little bit more about incidents not being properly managed, where we can have also punitive measures. But intent here is that we share information and that we, the totality of society, are more capable to address different security challenges, if you like, as they are coming up towards us. In the context of incidents, we cannot forget business continuity. Business continuity is, I would say, a normality for many organizations today, but in the context of IT security, they are providing us here a little bit of a list what they would like to see. However, business continuity is even a wider topic, both in terms of IT security and in general. We will address a little bit of business continuity from the perspective of Keyfactor products. When it comes to the supply chain security, the NIS2 touches on it quite nicely. However, there will be even more coming regulations from Europe's Cybersecurity Act will go even deeper on the supply chain security. Regardless, for the NIS2, what we want to assure is that we, as we are looking in our organization, in our supply chain, that we look at what are the relationship between the suppliers and service providers. And if, again, coming back to the incident, if an incident happened, that we can trace where in our supply chain it could have happened and why, and what we can do about it. Going to the next slide, on the same list in the Article 21.2, we are looking at the of this IT security. The security in network information systems is kind of trivial thing, but we are also looking at how we are procuring, how we are acquiring these components and how we are maintaining them over time. Maintenance here is looked from the perspective vulnerability handling and how we are what are we doing when a vulnerability is being discovered. When it comes to the policies and procedures to assess effectiveness of cybersecurity risks, that's little bit of a vague formulation, but the intent here is to kind of have our own measures where we are. In the context of the products that Keyfactor does, and totally not connected directly to our products, I would wholeheartedly recommend that you also look at the maturity model for the PKI that is created by PKI Consortium, where Keyfactor is one of the parts, but it is totally neutral from the vendor perspective, where you can assess a little bit where you are in your maturity level and what you could do to improve. When it comes to the cybersecurity hygiene practices and training, that's actually interesting aspect. It's mandatory that even on the C level and the board level, the ladies and gentlemen are being trained and security awareness is risen. Why? One of the motivations would be that ever prevalent phishing attacks, where you get all kind of goodies promised to you, and you click on a link or an SMS, and then you are in trouble. Just as an example. H, policies and procedures regarding use of cryptography and encryption is probably one of the most dear topics from my perspective, being a mathematician and crypto guy. But what we want to implement from the content in the context of NIS2 is the right use of cryptography that brings us a foundation of the cybersecurity robustness within our organization. There are some other aspects that Pierre and I might discuss with you guys when it comes to cryptographic agility. That's also a very important topic. When it comes to human resources, I would say it's more connected to the access management and asset management, in the sense that we want to assure that we have these controls implemented with our organization, meaning that I cannot access maybe certain type of information that I should not access to based on my role. And if my role has finished, that I do not have any more privileges to access. And finally, we have the use of multi-factor authentication or zero trust validations in the communications, but also in securing the data, I would say, wherever appropriate. So these are the topics that the legislator wants us to bring into practice within our organizations. So if you go now with this in mind into what the certificate issuance and certificate lifecycle management can bring to the table. Just as a quick reminder, I don't want to go into the theory of public infrastructure, certificate life cycle automation. There are a bunch of content that Keyfactor has produced there. But in content of this presentation, suffice to say that each human user or device or machine needs to have some identity in order to be part of our ICT systems. So one way to produce and manage identities and then bring different services atop is using certificates. There are maybe other ways, or certainly there are other ways, but they are arguably not as efficient and not as good as the technologies as we have using certificates. Why is that important for us? Important is that we have different type of identities that are used in different contexts within our organizations. Sometimes these identities have shorter or longer lifetimes. Sometimes these identities are also connected to different capabilities, what they can and cannot do within our organizations. For example, user identity is tied to real identity, meaning that probably there is a connection between the name and the role within the organization, yet the lifetime differs. A person does not stay forever and ever within one organization. Device identity, for instance, we have had situations where we have, say, manufacturers of devices, say, IoT use cases, where devices are being deployed in the field, be it some monitoring devices, that doesn't matter. And then the identity of those devices is set to be infinite. Well, that's very nice and easy shorthand to do. However, if you bring to one specific example, say if that device was your eNode B component on the telecom network, and we have seen that there is major vulnerability on these type of devices, we'd like to be able to do something about these devices and potentially maybe turn them off until the time we are able to upgrade the firmware. So therefore, endless or unlimited lifetime is not necessarily always a good thing. Then on the other side of the spectrum, where we have many services today in the cloud, be it our private clouds or with the cloud providers, we have a bunch of services that are spawning every day, every second, if you like. And these services have pretty short lifetime, be it a virtual machine or Kubernetes, whatever it is, right? And we want to make sure that those identities are existing only for the time that service is also existing. Why? Because the hackers can reuse identities, or if you like, tokens, and then do some advanced trickery, if you like, and attack our systems, as an example. So in terms of what certificates can enable us to avoid is the problems that have to do with service outage, malicious code, unauthorized access, and many others that I'm just here bringing some examples that are, I would say, daily news nowadays, what happens in different organizations. Of course, there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of organizations, so an expired certificate statistically would occur, but what we would like to do is to go towards a situation where it doesn't happen to us. Maybe it happens to our competitors. So, in the context of NIS2, what we need to implement is service availability as a pillar of business continuity. Why is that so? Well, again, business continuity should be normal intent of company leadership and everybody who works. But in terms of service availability and connected to the certificate issuance and life cycle, it helps us avoid outages. And if we are avoiding outages, we are avoiding incidents, and avoiding incidents, we are avoiding necessary reporting, mandatory incident reporting, and then possible fines. Just as a reminder, in the session 1, we have also mentioned what could be the fines, but they are type of in the ballpark of the GDPR, with addition that there could be also fines that have to do with the prohibition of work for the company leadership in case that the audit has discovered that it was kind of negligent behavior on the type of the account of the leadership. When it comes to the certificate lifecycle management, it becomes hygienic necessity. Again, certificate outages lead to service disruption, and that's something that's, I would say, in vast majority, 99.99% of situations, avoidable with use of proper technologies. Coming back to the certificate issuance and public key infrastructure, they enable us to use cryptography, encryption, and authentication, and other services from the bottom up in our organization, and they enable us also to divide into different type of use cases within our organization. So if I work for a larger enterprise, I may have 10 or more use cases for the utilization of certificates. Coming back to the previous examples when I mentioned users, devices, machines, etc., each of these could be a separate, or probably should be separate, use case for the utilization of certificates, how they're issued, validity, even use type of algorithms and other aspects, nitty-gritty details. What we also want to point out in the context of NIS2, that comprehensive log and audit capabilities are quite important. Why? It is hinted not by Keyfactor, but the organizations that are specializing in consulting and helping organizations to come towards the NIS1 and now NIS2 compliance, that good baseline is ISO 27000. So in order to do ISO 27000, you will be very much helped if you have good comprehensive log and audit capabilities. In the context of applied cryptography, these logs and audit records should be also cryptographically signed, so that we can assure that the integrity of these log and audit records is preserved in order to be able to analyze should necessity bring us to that point. So this is kind of a little bit of a background talk about all things that NIS2 requires us to do, also from the perspective of the certificate lifecycle, certificate issuance. But Pierre, you are in a position to work with many of our customers that are in different industries, in different verticals. Many of them are directly affected by NIS2. And here we have just selected, for the purposes of a dialogue, four verticals. So what would be your take on NIS2, and what are our customers asking us to help them with?
Yes, Admir. So very concretely, let's start with the, for example, energy sector. So we have a number of customers specifically dealing with the gas, electricity distribution, okay, production to distribution. So here, to achieve this NIS2 goal and objective, one of the very concrete measure and adoption is to adopt a so-called industrial PKI for this network. So here we are talking about a network consisting of smart meters, these sort of gateways, concentrators, those equipments which are collecting a lot of data from different multiple smart meters, etc., in this energy network. So number one here is to implement a proper PKI, where by doing so, the public infrastructure, where in terms of policy, cryptographic policy, cryptographic tactic, you really put in place your cryptographic policy from a operator point of view. The PKI is going to help you to secure systematically every single piece of equipment into this entire network. As soon as you have done that, not only you are in a position to cover the end-to-end encryption, hence confidentiality of the data, very important in the NIS2, the authenticity and integrity, not to be altered and modified, but also you are certain that you are in control of all those endpoints, those equipments. This is also helping fighting against, or let's say resolving the challenge of maintenance, securing the maintenance, right? So when any of these equipments during the entire operational life cycle has a defect, must be changed. So you cannot fake it. So someone cannot fake, a device if with a self-signed certificate, we talk in our terminology, because this device cannot improvise. This device has to follow the cryptographic rule, the certificate rule, if you want, of your PKI. So by that, you are enforcing that you cannot replace easily with uncompliant, cryptographically uncompliant devices having a wrong certificate, untrusted. So it's not only about things. People are usually thinking encryption, which is very right, and all this TLS aspect. But the device identity is going to secure also the entire maintenance aspect of your operation. So
Yeah,
in energy, we see a lot of adoption of that.
I can imagine for an energy operator, we are talking about thousands of devices, if not even more, and just the sheer effort to maintain and update them over a lifetime of these devices that may be several years is really big.
That's a very good point. So here we are talking about also scalability. So the good news is there are platforms such as our PKI and CLM platform able to deal with a lot of certificates in order to provide this real-time control of the devices, those certificates for authentication, certificate for signature, certificate for encryption, everywhere. You mentioned before, admin, the different type of identities and the lifetime. So here, for example, also a good practice is to reduce more and more the duration of the certificate validity, especially depending on the equipment in question. You don't want to have, for example, in your energy network, a smart meter having a certificate, an operational certificate valid for, I don't know, 50 years, 30 years. It doesn't make sense, especially if the hardware is going to be obsolete in, I don't know, 3 years or so. So there is a more regular upgrade and change of these smaller devices, whereas perhaps equipment which are more concentrators will be, living a longer life, so that you can adapt. The point here is to say that there is a big difference with the operator certificate. So with your own PKI, you set your operational rules. You're not depending on, let's say, a factory certificate. And I will come back to that in the manufacturing example. So with that, you are implementing, in fact, the Article 21.2, most of the points from the policies aspect, from the strong authentication aspect, from also with the signing keys and the certificate for signature, you will be able to assure and to protect the authenticity and integrity of your code, of the data being transited. So this is very important. Finally, even regarding the incident handling, the PKI technology also is bringing you a very, very strong aspect of audit logs. In this segment, we are talking about the audit logs following and tracking what has happened from a cryptographic point of view. So if you cannot be using a uncompliant certificate, it will be detected, it will be traced, or the system will say, the audit log will report, look, this certificate has been used. How come that this certificate has popped up, right? So the part of the post-incident is also very important, because the PKI solution will bring you very detailed audit logs, which can be even themselves secured and cryptographic signs to prove that the audit logs, even the audit logs themselves, cannot be altered.
Sure, yeah.
So that we have seen a lot with our energy customers.
That's very interesting. And what would you say would be, say, differences between, say, energy sector and telecommunication sector? There are, of course, some baseline similarities, but what do you see in the telecom sector? What is their pain points, if I may say so?
Yeah, so we have a lot of customers protecting, as you mentioned before, the 4G and 5G networks. The difference is rather in some finesse and differences in standard protocols and the way to implement it, as opposed as really the adoption is very similar in terms of what is the strategy. It is about securing that every single piece of the network is known, is under control with the cryptographic assets, hence digital certificates, that the maintenance of that can be absolutely controlled. So here in the telecom sector, there is this very strong notion also of zero-touch provisioning, of course.
Sure.
So in the field, when technicians are installing, replacing, think about, so we talk about radio access network, base stations, basically all those smart elements in relation with the antennas, to simplify. All that has to be done with a zero-touch provisioning. So there is a sophistication to automate and secure the way that all those equipments are identifying themselves, are presenting themselves to the core network, Hence, here with the PKI, not only they are going to authenticate themselves, there will be also a level of authorization. So again, even a fake device, even if you would imagine somebody able to fake or to have a counterfeit, we're not able to actually go into the forest and install, a base station to start connected to the network, precisely because of thanks to PKI, authentication and authorization together will be secure.
And you mentioned zero-touch provisioning, because provisioning one device may take, 5-10 minutes, maybe half an hour. But if we have thousands or tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands devices in the modern networks, it all adds up to a humongous number of hours that is more or less impossible for us to deliver from one side. From the other side of a lifetime, I guess, of these devices, we want to update them with maybe new firmware or some other new capabilities. In the session one, we have mentioned 3GPP Telecom organization that has brought a bunch of interesting standards also to our area. When it comes to the energy telecommunication, moving to the transportation, I guess all three of these are critical for society in terms of the categorization from the NIS2 perspective. What do you see in the transportation industry as commonalities and then also differences, if I may repeat the question?
Yes. So commonality, the good news is we see a adoption of basically same standards. So the good news is the vertical does not seem to create their own, implementation way and how to do things. So there is luckily a very repeated approach, and the transportation and rail here, for example, we have an image of rail. Rail also is adopting the the industrial security standards. So this is a very good news. Here in, for example, the segment of signaling, so this science to organize, how trains can circulate on the same track, basically. There is also a harmonization at the European level with this so-called ERTMS, and that is embracing at our ramification level, that is embracing the PKI technology. Same thing, in order to ensure that every single equipment controlling along the tracks are in sync with all the equipments which are being onboarded the trains circulating. And there is all this adoption of real-time validation of certificate, those protocols called OCSP. There is also, similarly to the telecom, there is the adoption of standard protocol for zero-touch provisioning and to auto-enroll all those equipments when they are installed, when they are replaced, especially in particular. So the good news is the companies under the NIS2, they don't need to reinvent the wheel. There is a lot of arsenal of tools, software existing to do that, and in particular, a lot of standards.
That is very good that you point out. I guess standards and interoperability is always a good thing, if possible, to implement. And just for our audience, we say transportation, but even the segment of transportation could be subdivided into the railway, automotive, space, air traffic, whatnot. And we have customers in all these areas, and they have also some their specific requirements in their particular industries and regulations atop or aside of NIS2. And yet it is possible to utilize cryptographic capabilities in all of them in accordance to the specific standards that are put into their particular area. But when it comes to the manufacturing or broadly IoT, I would dare to say, Pierre, that there is the biggest diversity, because there is in the manufacturing, we have a smaller manufacturers. Some of them are confused if they are just important or critical. in the context of NIS2, and then depending on what type of manufacturing it is, they might need to follow different type of standards. Some of them are under what we would say from IT perspective, industrial IoT. Some of them are more classical IoT or IT. And there is huge diversity there. How do we help those different groups of customers, organizations that have also requirement to be NIS2 compliant?
Yes, so that's a very good question. So those companies are either under NIS2 themselves directly, or they are a tier 1 supplier of the NIS2 customers. So think about energy network, telecommunication network, transportation network, waste management, food distribution, etc., etc. So if your company is a supplier, a tier 1 supplier of one of these NIS2 eligible company, well, you have, by cascading, you have the request also imposed to you. A very good aspect for the manufacturers of equipment that we call sometimes OEM or equipment manufacturers is that the PKI and the management of the life cycle is important for them for two reasons. Number one is for themselves. They can secure and protect their own brand and avoid and fight against counterfeit, against fake.
Sure.
So here, instead of talking about putting a operating certificate inside a device, inside an equipment being manufactured, we are talking about an initial device identity, also called factory identity, also called manufacturing identity.
Yes.
Having a proper digital certificate in it will help this device to not be counterfeit, to not be faked. But it will help this supplier to actually automate in a zero-touch provisioning way and secure way and standard way his product to be commissioned into his customer's network. And this is exactly what's happening in the energy, telecom, and transportation sector that we are seeing. So we see more and more the requirements and the RFPs and specifications from the operators requiring from the manufacturer to support, obviously, a PKI in the first place, but to support those protocols so that there will be a secured automatic enrollment of the certificate coming from the manufacturing identity into the operator identity.
I see. Pierre, we have only 2 minutes left. I'd just like to ask you, there was a question posed for the last session that we did not answer about software bill of materials. How do organizations judge? Is it helping them in their security posture, or is it just a list? What do they assess, and what would be Keyfactor recommendation?
Yeah, so if you're thinking a set of different software components made into a further package, yeah, this is absolutely key to protect it. First of all, for yourself, for your own sake, so you are in control of what's in it, and therefore here it's all about authenticity, hence software signing. You want to sign your software, and you want your suppliers to systematically sign the software components they are bringing to you. So code signing, software signing is becoming absolutely critical. And then there is the other part of the NIS2, which is this ongoing vulnerability management. If you are not signing regularly any update, you are not in control. So now there will be more and more pressure to absolutely all the time have the latest security update. Hence the security / vulnerability management with the most of the time over-the-air update we're talking about nowadays is becoming absolutely key. This is all about signing firmware.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I hope that we have covered other questions throughout the dialogue, but we will address remaining questions offline as well. Malin, what we need to say as a closing words?
Yes, I think we just need to say thank you, Pierre and Admir, for a really interesting presentation. We will cover the questions that we've gotten through the question and answer channels offline. And if you want to learn more, if you have the last slide, Admir, There is an ebook that you can download from the attachment section, and you can also look for the other webinar that we had a little bit earlier in September. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.